Today I'll be doing Penn State. First, I'll talk a little bit about the head coach, and then I'll talk some about the roster, and then I'll go through their schedule game by game and give you a predicted winner and loser for each game. Head coach James Franklin enters his 11th season as the head coach at Penn State and his 14th season as a head coach. He was the head coach at Vanderbilt for 3 seasons before getting the job at Penn State, where he did one of the most impressive things there that any coach has ever done, getting them to two 9-win seasons in a row, which is what got him the job at Penn State. And these past 10 seasons, his total record at Penn State is 88 and 39, and his record as a head coach is 112 and 54. And if I was to rank James Franklin as a head coach, I would have him just outside of the top 10 in the 11 to 13 range. I think he's a very good coach, and he wins a lot of games and puts a lot of players in the NFL. But I don't think he's an elite coach because he can't win any of the big games. So he's only won the conference once in his 10 years at Penn State, and that was in 2016, which was 8 years ago. And he's 1-9 in 10 years against Ohio State. And since Michigan has been a dominant team again these past 3 seasons, he's 0-3 against Michigan. And I think that Penn State is kind of in a bad situation with him because he is a good coach. Obviously, he's had 4 11-win seasons in his 10 years there and 5 10+ win seasons. And he's won a total of 21 games these past 2 seasons, 11 wins in 22 and then 10 wins in 23. Uh, so you can't really fire him because of his record being good. But I know Penn State wants more than that. They want to win conference championships and national championships. And to do that, they might have to fire Franklin to do it. And you really can't do it with the wins that he's been getting them, even though they're against average to bad teams. And Penn State has recruited well with James Franklin. He had the 14th ranked at recruiting class in 2023, and then this year he had the 15th ranked at recruiting class. So I'm not real high on Penn State this year. I'll just go ahead and tell you. I think they'll be a solid team, but I think their defense is going to take a step back. And starting up on the offensive part of the roster at quarterback, Drew Aller comes back, known on my channel as Disaster Aller. I don't think this is really good news for Penn State. I know I've said that he had a terrible year last year, and it wasn't really terrible if you look at his numbers, but compared to the year that he was supposed to have last year, it was terrible because he's a 5-star quarterback and was expected to have a huge year, and he had a below average year last season. So in 13 games, he only had 2,631 passing yards and only completed 59.9% of his passes and only had a 6.8 yards per throw average. All those numbers were not very good. Now, the only good thing about Disaster Aller last season was his touchdown to interception ratio. That was 25 to 2, 25 touchdown passes and only 2 interceptions. But if Penn State is going to finally do what they've been wanting to do for a long time, he's going to have to play much better. And he looked awful in the spring game, and I just kind of doubt that he's going to be any better this year. And wide receiver is a problem too. Because even if Disaster Aller is better, he's got to have someone good to throw the ball to, and not just one. good receiver. He needs several good receivers to throw the football to. So they bring in a five-star wide receiver from Ohio State, Julian Fleming, who has kind of been a disappointment since he's been at Ohio State. He has only 60 catches for 803 in 23 games combined these last two seasons, and he has six touchdowns, averaging 13.4 a catch. Now, part of that is because Marvin Harrison and Emeka Ibuka were also on the team. Uh, and of course, Penn State is not loaded at wide receiver. So I think Julian Fleming will be their top receiver this year. And I think he'll be pretty good for them. But Penn State loses their best receiver from last season, Keandre Lambert Smith, who transferred out this spring. And nobody else other than Fleming looks like a very good receiver right now. Now, they do have one of two good starting tight ends coming back from last season. They lose Theo Johnson at tight end, who's off to the NFL, but they've got back Tyler Warren, who had last season 34 catches for 422 and seven touchdowns, averaging 12.4 a catch. And he had in the bowl game at five catches for 127. I think he'll be one of the best tight ends in the country this year, not having to share catches with Theo Johnson uh, now. I'm sure he'll help them out with pass catching. But just Penn State's passing game does not look very good right now. So running back though looks really good. This will be the strength of Penn State's offense this year. They return both running backs from last season who are really good, two of the best running backs in the country. So they've got Nicholas Singleton, who has in 2 years combined on 327 carries, 1,813 yards, and 20 touchdowns, averaging 5.5 a carry. And he was the number one running back recruit of 2022. And then they also have Katron Allen, who has in 2 years combined 1,769 yards on 339 carries and 16 touchdowns, averaging 5.2 a carry. This is one of the country's best running back units. And on the offensive line, I don't think Penn State is going to be as good here this year. They had a really good offensive line last year, but they lose three starters, including a left tackle Olo Fashionoa, who went first round and was one of the best offensive linemen in the country last year. I don't really see a replacement for him. Now, one of the two starters returning is a really good player, right guard Sal Wormley, who is one of the best players at his position. He only allowed 11 total pressures and one sack last season, and they have recruited really well on the offensive line, so I'd expect them to still be pretty good here. So on the defensive side, really good last year, a top five defense. Abdul Carter comes back, who is the best player on Penn State's defense. He's an amazing player. He was one of the best linebackers in the country these past two seasons. But James Franklin has decided to move him over to defensive line, and I'm sure he has a reason for it, and maybe that will turn out to be the right thing. But I'm not really a fan of moving a player over to a different position when they've been one of the best in the country at another position. But Abdul Carter has in 25 games these past two seasons 104 tackles and 45 total pressures and 11 sacks and nine pass breakups and three forced fumbles and an interception. I think he'll be a first round pick next year. And then the defensive line has two starters coming back. And they also have Danny Dennis Sutton, who was a five-star recruit and played in every game last year, but only started three games and still had 30 total pressures and 3.5 sacks and 26 tackles and two forced fumbles and a fumble recovery and a pass breakup. So the defensive line I still think is going to be good. And at linebacker, Colby King comes back, who will probably be their best linebacker this year with Abdul Carter moving over to defensive line. He had last year 59 tackles and 1.5 sacks and three total pressures and a fumble recovery. And they've got some other very talented players at linebacker that should be ready to move into the starting role. And then in the secondary, both safeties return who are really good. They return Kevin Winston, who led Penn State in tackles last season with 60 and had five pass breakups and two fumble recoveries, then an interception. And Jalen Reed, who had last season 46 tackles and two interceptions and a pass breakup and a sack. And they bring in two transfer cornerbacks. So they bring in uh, Jalen Kimber, who started at Georgia, but then transferred to Florida. He's a four-star recruit. He had last season in 12 games 23 tackles and five pass breakups and a fumble recovery and a pass breakup. I mean, a pass rush. And they also have A.J. Harris, a five-star cornerback who started at Georgia, a top 30 recruit in the country of 2023, and didn't play much for them as a freshman, but I saw that he's probably going to be a starting cornerback for them this year and is looking really good. And then they've got other talented defensive backs that I'm sure will play a lot and help them out. And on special teams, the kicker looks questionable, but they've got one of the best punters coming back, Riley Thompson, who uh, had a 45.8 yards per punt average, which was a second in school history. So this is a solid roster, just not elite in my opinion. They'll still have one of the top defenses in the Big Ten this year, and the offense will be okay, I think, but pretty one-dimensional. So now moving on to the predictions. They start the year on the road at West Virginia. I think this will be a close one. So West Virginia can match Penn State pretty well at the line of scrimmage. Uh, Penn State probably has a better defensive line, but West Virginia I think has a better offensive line, and they've also got two really good running backs. And their quarterback is not great either, but I think he's a little better than Disaster Aller is, and he's a good runner, unlike Disaster Aller. And West Virginia isn't really loaded at wide receiver either, and their defense is pretty solid overall. So I do think that Penn State is a better team than West Virginia. And if this was at Penn State or even a neutral field, I would for sure pick Penn State. But West Virginia is a really tough place to play, especially when they're a good team, which I think they will be this year. So I'm actually going to take the upset. So then they play Bowling Green, which will be an easy win. And then they play Kent State, another easy win. And then they play Illinois. Illinois, I don't think is going to be very good. I think Penn State should win this one fairly easily by three scores, at least 17 points. And then they play UCLA, a solid team, but not a great team. They might be able to challenge Penn State a little bit, but Penn State's just way more talented, and I think that they'll win this one by at least a couple of touchdowns. And then they play on the road at USC. I think Penn State's defense can slow down Lincoln Riley's offense some in this game, but I don't think they can shut them down. They may hold them to like 28 or 30. And USC's defense, I think, will still struggle some this year, but I don't think Penn State's really going to be an offense that can go out there and score 40 points on them. And I think that Penn State is probably a better team. They have better play at the line of scrimmage, but Miller Moss is a much better quarterback, I think, than Disaster Aller is. And USC is loaded at wide receiver, and they've got a couple of running backs that should be pretty good. So I'm actually going to take USC in this one. Uh, so then they play on the road at Wisconsin after getting a week off. Wisconsin's offensive line is going to be really good. I think better than Penn State's offensive line this year. And Wisconsin's defensive line, though, is not very good at all. Penn State has a huge advantage there. Uh, and Wisconsin's new quarterback can be better than Disaster Aller, but he's also looked a lot like Disaster Aller at times. I think he's going to be solid for Wisconsin, but not great. And Wisconsin also has a couple of pretty good running backs. I don't think they're as good as the Penn State's though. And Wisconsin though has Will Pauling, who is one of the Big Ten's best receivers, and Penn State doesn't really have a receiver like that. And the rest of Wisconsin's defense can match up well with Penn State's. Actually, Wisconsin's secondary may be a little better than Penn State's. And I like Wisconsin's linebackers too. And I would take Penn State on a neutral field and at Penn State, of course, but on the road, I'm going to say Wisconsin also upsets them. Then they play Ohio State at home. So even though Penn State will have three losses at this point, only two conference losses, so there would still be a chance that if they could win this game, they could go to the conference championship. So I think they'll show up for this game and fight hard. But Ohio State, I think, is just going to be too good this year. Ohio State's running backs, I think, are even better than Penn State's, and I think this year they've got a better offensive line, and Will Howard at quarterback looks better than Disaster Aller has in college. And Ohio State's loaded at wide receiver, and their defense is even better than Penn State's. Penn State's defense, I think, will keep them in this game, and it'll stay close for most of the game. And Penn State's offense, though, I just don't think is going to be able to do hardly anything in this game. Disaster Aller didn't show up against really good defenses last year. And I think Ohio State will pull away in the fourth quarter and win by around two touchdowns. But then they play Washington. This one will be a win. So Penn State will dominate the line of scrimmage in this game, and Penn State's defense overall is much better than Washington's. Washington is really going to struggle on that side of the ball this year, and on the offensive side of the ball. Uh, Washington isn't going to have the running back unit that Penn State is going to have, and their passing game isn't going to be near what it was last year either. I think Penn State will blow Washington out. And then on the road at Purdue, this will be a big blowout win. A horrible team. Penn State is so much more talented, so much better coached than Purdue is. And then on the road at Minnesota, Minnesota I think is going to be a decent team. I looked through their roster. They've got some really good players, and I think this will be a somewhat competitive game. But Penn State's talent, I think, is going to be too much, and they'll end up winning this one by a couple of touchdowns. So then they end the year against Maryland, a team that I think now is going to be awful. Not much talent. I don't think that they'll be able to score hardly anything in this game. Penn State's defense will shut them down, and I think Penn State will be able to score quite a bit on Maryland, and I think this will be a blowout. So my final prediction for Penn State is 8-4 overall and 6-3 in the conference. So Penn State would have been in the 12-team playoff a whole lot in James Franklin's time. If of course the playoffs would have been 12 teams and not 4 teams. But I actually think they're going to miss out uh, this year of even the 12-team playoff. And you can type in the comments that I just hate Penn State and that I'm an idiot and that they're going 16-0. But I don't know why you would be mad at me for this because I'm just a YouTuber giving my prediction. Penn State could go undefeated and make it the national championship game. And they've not lost 4 games yet. So far, they've lost none because the season's not even started yet. So of course they can still go undefeated. So cry about something else if you're wanting to fuss at me over this. And I know that my team Ole Miss embarrassed them last year. An overrated Big Ten team, Penn State, beating them by 13 points. My team, being a underrated SEC team. But that's not why I'm picking Penn State to be down this year. They've got some big questions on their roster. So that will be it with this video, and please subscribe and thanks for watching, and I'll be back soon.